Hello, welcome to Imagebearers. My name is Otoma Edje. I'm very excited to have on the program today Carolyn Custis James, who is going to be sharing about her awesome book, Maelstrom. I think you have a copy with you, correct?
Yes. You want me to wave it?
Yes, if you could. That's awesome. And so she's going to be sharing about her book today. So this is season 3, episode 44 of our program. For those that are tuning in perhaps for the first time, this is a video podcast designed to help us better understand the scriptures, human nature, and history as we strive to honor God with our lives. So with each episode, we try to have some fun and build family in the process. So hopefully you'll be along for the ride and get something out of the time we have today. But as I said, also have some fun in the process. So again, thank you so much, Carolyn, for joining the program.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be participating.
And my good friend also, Sherry, who's my book BFF.
Book BFF.
She is a prolific reader, and we definitely partner from time to time in different episodes such as this and other projects. So thank you again for taking time out of your day to join us also, Sherry.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Otoma.
Amen. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Sherry, you want to start out with the first few questions?
Absolutely. And Carolyn, as I was about to say right before we started the broadcast, that the book is life-changing for me, and we'll get into why through these questions. But thank you so much, and I'm so very honored to be here. So, starting right out, can you please explain what Maelstrom means, what it refers to, and why you chose to use Maelstrom for the title of your book?
You know, this is a book about men, but it's also about women. Everything about us is this, affects the other. But I became concerned. I think it really started when I read an article where some experts were looking at ISIS and saying that young men in Western countries were being drawn into ISIS because they were looking for a sense of purpose, of meaning, of belonging. And one thing I forgot. Throw it in the drawer. Sorry.
I just turned mine off like literally 10 seconds before we started. I'm like, oh, shoot. Yeah. So we'll get it.
They were saying that young men were being drawn to ISIS looking for a sense of meaning and purpose and belonging. And I thought, where are we in this conversation? Where is the Christian message in this conversation? And what I started out to do with Maelstrom was, I've done a lot of work about women in the Bible, and I kept running into the stories of men that get overlooked. And these stories are so powerful, but it's not like David and Goliath and Joshua and Jericho, these manly stories that we want our boys to know. Right. They were other kinds of stories that sort of get lost behind somebody else who's a more important figure. But I stumbled in the process of wanting to write about these men. With the struggles that men face that are similar to the ones that women face. What does it mean to be a man? And we have definitions of masculinity that are out of reach for some men and boys, or that they're not interested in, being a wrestler or, a big macho man. They have other interests and other gifts, and it's very limiting what we've done, and it's also something that a man can lose. And he can lose it because he's not interested, because of a failure in his life, a divorce, a medical diagnosis, even just old age.
Right.
And, so where is his manhood? And, I don't believe that God has given us such shaky things to build meaning and purpose on.
Right.
And, I didn't know it at the time as I started to write. My husband reads my work. He's my first editor. And he said, "You're talking about patriarchy." And I really, I didn't start out to write a book about patriarchy, but I named it Maelstrom, sort of a play on words of the maelstroms that are these swirling whirlpools that are powerful and, are known in literature. Edgar Allan Poe writes about them. And, just thinking of patriarchy in terms of this swirling whirlpool that drags men down and causes them to lose who they are as God's sons. And that's where the book went, to talk about the whirlpool that men are confronted with and boys are confronted with, where it's just a fixed definition, and you're not a man if you don't XYZ. And some men are never going to do that. Some of our soldiers who come back from battle are so disabled that they wouldn't fit the definition, and yet they all do. The definition that God gives his sons.
Right. Well, that's funny that you mentioned the soldiers and you mentioned the lost men of ISIS. So how is Maelstrom related to violence and war, do you think?
Well, patriarchy is a social system that empowers men over women and some men over other men. So it's not a winning system for the majority of men, I would say. And it is about power. It is about power over others. The ancient patriarchal system that still exists in some measure in our own culture and is fully fledged in others. It empowers the oldest male in the family over all the other members of the family. So it's the father rule. That's what patriarchy means. And it's something that surfaces after the fall, when God says that to the woman that the man will rule over you. Prior to that, in Genesis 1 and 2, there's no rule over. There is a rule outward by God's sons and daughters over creation, for the flourishing of creation.
Right.
So it's what is confusing to us as Christians is that the Bible emerges from a patriarchal culture.
Right.
You have, as soon as you get to Genesis 4, already there's violence, when Cain kills his brother Abel. That's about patriarchy.
Right.
And the sort of the foundation of patriarchy is primogeniture, which is what privileges the highest male over the other males in the family. So like the firstborn son is like the crown prince. And what you have in Genesis with Cain and Abel, Cain is the oldest son and God blesses Abel. And Cain is outraged and he kills his brother.
Right.
And that's just the first episode of what patriarchy is doing. Right. So, the thing that I learned as I began to look at this was that patriarchy, we have taken patriarchy to be the Bible's message, but it is the backdrop to the Bible's message. And it's the ideal cultural backdrop that would set off in the strongest relief the radical revolutionary power of Jesus' gospel. So, when you put patriarchy in its place, behind the story, then you begin to understand what's going on in those stories and the power of the gospel and how
Right.
it overthrows that. So
Right. So descriptive, not prescriptive. Yeah. So from your study, you mentioned that the term image bearer is not a static term that's defined by a number of attributes. So how would you define image bearer?
You know, I have come to see it as the most important thing we can know about ourselves. And that it's not just that we are the highest life form, it's that we have the highest possible dignity, meaning, and purpose that you could have. I mean, this surpasses patriarchy or feminism.
Yeah.
It means that we are created to be like God, not to be God, but to be reflections of his
Right.
heart and his character. And it means right at the outset of the Bible, we are given this calling and this open invitation to know the God who created us to be like himself. So already we have a mission, a lifelong mission to know God's heart, to begin to see the world through his eyes, to love what he loves, and to embrace his passion for the world. And that we are to represent him, that we are, we participate in divine revelation. People are supposed to get an understanding of what God is like by rubbing shoulders with us. And it means that we are the ones who are to carry out his mission in the world, to do his work. God doesn't do everything for us. He sends us to do the work. And, you know, when you're praying for help or for comfort, God usually sends one of his image bearers to do that work.
Yes.
So it is the most exalted calling, and we all share it. So it means that when we abuse someone, that it is worse than we ever imagined, because we are offending Almighty God by harming his image bearer.
Yeah. Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. And that's what I frequently think. I frequently think that, you know, I wish people understood the word sin better, you know, missing the mark, and that's the reason that it's not the fun stuff, right, that we're not allowed to do. It's the things that damage us, damage our relationship with God, and damage our relationships with others. So that's great.
Even when Paul writes in Romans 3:23 that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, it changes the definition of sin to be that we fall short of reflecting truth about who he is and his heart. So it's a big deal. It's a really big deal.
It's a big deal, and it's much more. It's much more profound, and can be really attack the heart if we would listen to it and not just shut that door, you know, about what that actually means. So so now I'm excited about this one. In the scriptures, woman is described as ezer kenegdo. That's the Hebrew. Can you please break down this term for us? I love this so much, and explain its significance in understanding how men and women are related to God as his image bearers, and not in a hierarchical relationship to each other.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's a big mouthful there.
Well, it's a life-changing concept for all of us. When I graduated from college, I was single for 10 years. And I always felt like this text was talking to somebody else, because we talk a lot about marriage. This is about the wife and the creation of the bride. But you know, there's no parameters to this. It's the creation of the female. And it's actually my Pennsylvania license plate. It's
nice.
Ezer. when I was writing my first book, I went to look at this word, because this is when God is saying it's not good for the man to be alone, and this is what he needs. And it gets translated helper most of the times that it's used in the Old Testament. And by the time I came to study it, the church debate over this word had done an inventory. This is what Hebrew scholars do. They look up all the times the word appears in the Old Testament and how it's used. And it's used 21 times in the Old Testament, twice in Genesis 2 for the woman. It's used 3 times for military nations that Israel is summoning to send military aid because they're being overpowered. They're under attack and they're being overpowered. So it's send your armies. And the remaining 16 times is used for God as the helper of his people. So this is a unique way that women are called to reflect God's character. This is, how we're supposed to be like him in the kind of help we provide. And, God, there's so many jokes about the creation narrative, but God isn't making jokes. And he makes a blanket statement. It's not good for the man to be alone. He doesn't say when he's at home or when he wants a family, or it's not good for the man to be alone. And there are no parameters to that. And there's no parameters to what he's creating either. This is a birthright that women have. Little girls who are born are azers. That's what they are. The doctor should say it's an azer. And elderly women are azer connectos. So when I looked at the inventory, I went and looked up all those verses. And in every verse, in every occurrence, there was military language in the context. God is our shield and defense. He's better than chariots and horses. He stands sentry watch over his people. The 3 nations, Israel wanted them to send their army. So then I look at the Garden of Eden and I'm thinking, Eden is a war zone. There's already an enemy getting ready to attack. And there are dangerous trees in the garden. And the man is commanded to guard the garden. And it's the same language that's used of the angel guarding the garden after they are evicted. And God creates male and female to rule and subdue, which means they're going to experience resistance. This isn't going to be a cakewalk. There are challenges and the whole earth to explore and cultivate. And I concluded from that the Azer is a warrior, that God created his daughters to join his sons in the battle for his kingdom. And that what the enemy did in his first attack was to break up that alliance, that what I call the blessed alliance, that God created his sons and daughters to rule and subdue and to be fruitful and multiply. And that's not just about reproduction. It has to do with the gospel, to multiply image bearers of the living God. And that he means for us to come together and to be strength through one another, to be in the battle together. It means that we're supposed to get in the way when our brothers head down the wrong path. We are not spectators to what God is doing in the world. No human being is called to be a bystander. And the calling on women, that was life-changing for me when I read that. And my father said, very conservative pastor, said, I think you're right about that. He said, I've always seen her as a spiritual helper, but it's always connected to marriage. And it does apply to marriage. but it applies to every other relationship that we have.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I have chills about the Azer Megdo.
You are one.
All right. Well, again, thanks so much for coming on the program. I think that I am blown away by your book. I think obviously this is Imagebearers, and what you communicate in your book about the relationship is not one of hierarchy, but the fact that we're image bearers just spoke to me in just some very powerful ways. The other thing that really stood out to me, and this is a question I have for you, and I'll just go ahead and read it because I just want to make sure I get this right. It says, although the Bible is perfect, you mentioned that after Genesis 1 and 2, it would be helpful to have another chapter that would be before Genesis 3 and the full. And this would help us understand our primary identity is that we are image bearers and not man or woman. So you've kind of covered that a little bit. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to elaborate, or you felt like you've covered it all in that respect.
Well, one of the things that I take from Genesis 1 and 2 is that when God created male and female to be his image bearers, it says that he blessed them, and then he sends them out to fulfill this mission, this global mission together. And I call that the Blessed Alliance. And my husband and I are working in very early stages of a book on that, because we have found that to be hugely important all through the Bible. When you read Genesis 1 and 2, I think this is elevated to a kingdom strategy, that God created his kingdom on earth to rest on two pillars or two load-bearing walls. And one is our relationship with our Creator, that we won't know who we are or how we are to live in God's world if we don't know the God who created us. And we have Jesus now to help us understand what that means. But the other thing is the relationships that we have horizontally. And I call that the Blessed Alliance. And I believe it is a kingdom strategy, that in the enemy's first attack, he brought down both load-bearing walls, that he disconnected us from our Creator and divided us from one another. And, we're seeing evidence of rampant division everywhere. But, when you read the New Testament, there's Jesus praying that we would be one as he is one with his Father. Paul talking about us being a body with many different parts. When you think of your own body, it's hard to imagine. We get upset when we have a bad hair day or a hangnail or something. We want our bodies to be strong and fully functioning, and every member doing its part. And we're called a temple. This is where we are, the place where God lives in his Spirit. And so it's very disappointing to me to read Genesis 1 and 2 and just boom, in chapter 3 it all falls apart, and we never get to see this unfallen image bearer alliance of men and women. But I think all through the Bible we get glimpses. I think I've written in Maelstrom examples of where men and women come together and God's purposes advance in just mind-bending ways. And I think it still happens today. And but it's a goal that we when you look at the state of the church in our own country today, it's just splintered, and there's abuse in the church. So it's we have a long ways to go, and it would have been nice to have a chapter 2b or something in the Bible to give us more. But it's all through Paul's writings. It's like, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Figure this out. You've got the basics here with what Jesus has done and who he is, and but you have to work at it. It's not, we don't have a formula that if you do A, B, and C, it's a lifelong struggle for all of us to understand who we are and how we are to live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that the thing that you mentioned is that missing chapter, so to speak. Again, the Bible's perfect, but it really is the hunger for Jesus and really understanding who Jesus is. That really helps us to understand from Genesis 1 and 2 to Genesis 3. Can you share about that a little bit?
Well, what you ask that a little bit different way, I think God means for us to work at who we are. He didn't hand it to us in a silver platter. He's offering himself. Mm-hmm. Does that at creation. He opens a door that only opens from the inside. It wouldn't matter how badly we wanted to know him if he didn't open the door. And we learn what he's like by creation. One of the things that, when you think about what is hope in the Bible, I think hope is the moment God comes looking for his rebellious image bearers. It starts right there. He knew what happened. He knew what they did. And he comes looking for them. Where are you? Mm-hmm. And that's the story of the Bible. Where are you? And so God offers us himself in creation. Look at creation and try to fathom the person who did that, the mm-hmm. God who did that. And why would he not? One of the things that I think of when I read the news or when I look at what's happening in the world, I've often said, I think if I were God, I would take a cosmic baseball bat and just slam it in, because it's discouraging when we look at it, and you think, even the church, and he doesn't give up on us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's our intent with this program, and I think through your book and many other books and other ways that people are communicating, we're trying to, get back to what we believe we see from the scriptures to really be pleasing to God with how we live. So one of the things you mentioned also in your book is that there's a difference between sex and gender, and that's a very significant thing for us to understand. Can you break that down a little bit?
Yeah, typically how the anthropologists or sociologists define it is that sex is how you were born, and gender is culturally defined. So one is physical, and the other is how your culture defines what it means to be male or female. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to masculinity, which is what Maelstrom is about, in the world, in every culture, manhood is not a given. It's something you must earn. And in some cultures, they have some kind of rites or rites of passage, some kinds of things that young men are asked to go through are just, I didn't want to describe it in the book because it's so brutal. But even in our own culture, we hear from the pulpits, you are not a man if you are not XYZ. if you're not a leader, if you're not a provider, if you're not a protector. And, you know, like I said, that is out of reach for a lot of men, and for certainly it's out of reach for little boys and elderly men. And, you know, God's calling on his sons is a birthright. You don't earn it. You're born as God's image bearer, and that is your calling. And the expressions that you have of it are unique to you as a human being, and according to the context in which you are born, and the challenges that you face, and the opportunities that you may have. But you know, your calling as God's son, as a reflection of the Creator himself, is a birthright. Mm-hmm. And you can own it, you can violate it, you can ignore it, you can, you know, deface it in other human beings, but you can't take it away. You cannot take it away. Doesn't matter, you know, what happens, you can't lose it. You cannot lose it.
Yeah, I'm not sure how your book has been received by men, but I think that it's actually a defense of men, not an attack on men. And again, we may talk about that depending on our time, but this is a defense of men. And I hope it hasn't been taken as something other than that. My next question kind of leads right off of the one that I just asked, which is, in your book, you cite anthropologist David Gilmour, and he noted that manhood has been understood to have three core responsibilities. Can you please share about, you know, what these three core responsibilities are that he has cited, and why it's dangerous for us to think that way?
Well, he calls man the impregnator, protector, provider. And it really is culturally how masculinity is defined, even in the church. You know, you are not a man if, you know, an intruder breaks into your house, even if your wife has a black belt. You need to be bloody on the floor before she's, you know, enters into the fray, you know, because you're the protector. Well, you know, one of my best friends was a man who, as a teenager, was injured on a trampoline and paralyzed. So where is he? He was one of the most amazing, wonderful Christian men I've ever known. And, you know, to say he wasn't, nobody would say that to his face, but the definitions say that, don't they? So, you know, we have, you know, men in the church who are being told that they aren't really men. And we have man camps and all these tough things that we want men to do, when there are a lot of men who aren't wired that way. You know, where would we be without the artistry of men and the music of men? And, you know, they're not all gonna be, you know, punching somebody in the face. And they probably, none of them should be doing that. So it's just sort of what has happened is that when we read the Bible, we mistake patriarchy as the message. And, you know, when I've taken patriarchy and put it in the backdrop, the stories, just the power of these stories, and I've written about it in Maelstrom, they're incredible. And, you know, if we come at the stories and say you need to be an impregnator and a protector and a provider, look at Jesus. You know, he didn't get married and have a family, and he fed the multitudes, but he was supported by women. And, you know, as far as protection goes, Look what happened to him. Look what happened to him. And look what happened to many of his followers. You know, it's deeper than that. It's about the Imago Dei. It's about Philippians 2, putting the interests of others ahead of yourself, putting on the mind of Christ. It's about self-giving love. And the masculinity that should be coming out of the church should be amazing to the rest of the world and a great good to it. And I thank you for saying, Otoma, that the book is advocating for men. Because, one of the most encouraging things in the ministry that I have has been the men that I've met, the Christian men that I've met. I have met some of the most incredible Christian men in different places that I've visited, and men who live out the gospel in just amazing ways. There are 3 men I talk about in Maelstrom that I met in South Africa. And one of them was from Ethiopia, one was from Pakistan, and one was from Rwanda. And all 3 of them encountered horrific situations of injustice. In Ethiopia, he was a professor, and he was accused of doing something that he hadn't done by some Islamic students, and they attacked him and beat him brutally, and he was hospitalized. And one of them, the one from Pakistan, his father was kidnapped by terrorists, and he was abused. He was they subjected him to terrible acts, and then he was murdered. And the third one was in Rwanda, where a neighbor had murdered members of his congregation and of his family. And I heard their stories. I'll never get over it. The Ethiopian professor went back to the university and fought for those students to continue and finish their education. The man from Pakistan said he had murder in his heart toward Muslims, and he said God worked in his heart, and to this day, some of his very best friends are Muslims. The Rwandan man went back into his community and loved his neighbor. I mean, what are we talking about when we talk about manhood? These men embody Jesus' gospel, and it takes my breath away.
This is an additional question from what we had discussed initially, but do you think that the view that some men in church may have, that a man should be a certain way, similar to the what was cited by David Gilmour, affects even how they may vote in terms of their political? They may be attracted to a particular candidate because of that person may embody certain characteristics that they would deem perhaps more manly. Not to go too down that rabbit hole, but I guess just what's your thoughts on that? And the second question is, do you think it also then impacts the way that these men may read the Bible, for example, to perhaps distance themselves from things like the Beatitudes that talk about gentleness and these kinds of things? Can you share about that briefly? Not to get too political, but just generally speaking on those items.
Well, to answer your question, I do think it's had a huge impact. You know, when a pastor says that he's looking for the meanest SOB to be his candidate for president, he doesn't want Jesus. That's the antithesis of Jesus. And I think it is very confusing to have that view of masculinity and try to be a follower of Jesus, because Jesus wasn't like that. And the three men I'm talking about weren't like that. I think what they did took more strength than to be a mean person.
Right.
And so yes, I do. I think it's been very impactful. What was your second question?
Second question is, do you think that also impacts how people who have that mindset read the Bible? So, for example, they may look at the Beatitudes and minimize the importance of having those qualities in their lives because they don't believe they're manly, as in gentleness, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Turning the other cheek or what have you.
Well, you know, I may differ with a lot of people on this, but I think I don't categorize these are male attributes and these are female attributes. I think that's gotten us into a lot of trouble. And there's no definition of that in Genesis 1 and 2. It's not, so you're a female, so you should be kind and gentle and loving. And, you know, if you read what Paul says in Galatians about the fruit of the Spirit, my husband calls that the description of masculinity.
Come on.
The description of Jesus. And, you know, one of the biggest problems women have faced, well, I think both genders face this, is that certain attributes are off limits for us. Mm-hmm. Women have to be strong and courageous and decisive and, you know, and to say no and mean it. And one of my favorite stories is to hear from, and it's mostly African-American male athletes, the football players. They're going to talk, a lot of them are going to talk about mom.
Right.
and, you know, the man she made out of them. And, you know, they sometimes have veered off course and they have to deal with their mother because she's an Azer warrior and she's not going to put up with that. There's too much at stake. And, you know, that's what Michael Strahan said, you know, his mother made a man out of him. Mm-hmm. And, you know, maybe we wouldn't agree with all the definition that he would embrace as far as, you know, masculinity. But, you know, it's, I think we all need to embrace all of the attributes that Jesus reflects. And I think we've really hurt a lot of people by saying this is male and this is female, or you know, making fun of somebody because they may be, you know, they may have an attribute that we think belongs to the other gender, and it's just but I have a real hard time with that. And I feel like, you know, the way we've defined things, that we all get stunted because men have to be hard and, you know, they don't cry and they don't, you know, show emotion and they get bottled up, and women don't cultivate the strength that we so desperately need, you know, to put a stop to things that are wrong and to take a stand for something.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. There's no columns in Beatitudes that has men on this side, women, or whatever. So it's just, these are the fruits, as you said, from Galatians. Okay, so you're moving on. In your book, you also note that God overturned the patriarchy. Can you cite maybe one example showing how God, you know, did that? And then secondly is, you know, how is the patriarchy counter to the gospel?
Okay. You may have to remind me of the second question when I get wrapped up in the first one. But, if you just take the book of Genesis, Walter Brueggemann calls primogeniture the linchpin of patriarchy. So it's the firstborn. The firstborn son is a crown prince in the family. I have a friend from Tanzania, and I asked him, "What's it like to be the firstborn?" And
I live there. Nice place.
Oh, really? Well, he just rose up and as he answered me, he just took on this regal demeanor, and he said, I am my father's confidant. My siblings all defer to me. I will build my father's reputation and his estate in the community. He makes no decisions without me. And, just the primacy of the firstborn is like what patriarchy stands on. So if you go through Genesis, you find, God chooses Abel and not Cain. He chooses Isaac and not Ishmael. He chooses Jacob and not Esau. He chooses Judah, and Jacob chooses son number 11, Joseph, and it totally tears the family apart. But all through, God is overthrowing the linchpin. He's pulling the plug on patriarchy. And, the stories in the Bible where women step out on the pages of scripture are, an overthrow of that. The book of Ruth for me is one of the biggest examples, the one that changed my own story, because, we've always interpreted it as a romance where Boaz gets the girl, but it's actually a narrative where it centers on the women, and Ruth is initiating the action, and Boaz is responding to her initiatives. It's all about Mosaic law, and she's living on the hungry side of the law. So it reads differently from that point of view. And Boaz is this man, he is in impeccable compliance with Mosaic law, but she really moves him from the letter of the law to the spirit. It's sort of like the Sermon on the Mount in the Old Testament, where she ends up taking home 29 pounds of winnowed barley to her mother-in-law. And Naomi, her hope in God revives, that he's not abandoned his hesed, his faithful love to her, when she sees a load of grain. But that's what turns the story for Naomi. So it's if you put patriarchy in the background, these stories become so much more powerful. We're not looking at Cinderella here. We're looking at the gospel, where people are making sacrifices for one another.
Okay. Moving on to Jesus, how did he confront the patriarchy in his day? Just one example.
I think one of my favorite examples is his relationship with Mary of Bethany, because he defended her right to sit at his feet and learn. She was a rabbinical student. And, the Bible isn't just about intake, it's about giving out. And he takes her deeper when he doesn't come in time to save her brother's life, but he raises her brother. She learns to trust him at a whole new level. And he's taught her that the same thing he's taught everybody else, that he's going to die and that he will rise again. And so at the feast in honor of Jesus, it's John chapter 12, when she anoints him for his burial, and people think she doesn't know what she's doing. Jesus said, in Matthew's gospel, he says she has done a beautiful thing when she poured this expensive perfume on him to prepare him for his burial. She's an Azer warrior, and he has trained her. And now she stands with him in the battle. She's the only one of his disciples to say yes to the cross. It meant everything to him. And, you know, what she poured on him is what they used to pour on a corpse. I mean, she is affirming his death. I call her the first great New Testament theologian, and Jesus trained her. So he trained her by teaching her. He trained her through her painful struggle when she was at his feet weeping because he didn't, Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And there's a whole new level of faith that comes from pain. And it comes into expression when he's in pain and struggling, and his disciples are all in denial.
I think what you share in your book is so powerful. And that, when you mentioned that the Bible was written in a patriarchal society, and sometimes we get confused when we read the Bible and we think it teaches patriarchy, when in fact, actually, it's overturning the patriarchal system that the Bible was, that the people lived through in biblical times.
Yes.
And I think, that was a very powerful concept, for me as I went through and read, went through your book. Last question, then we're going to have some sharing. But towards the end of the book, you mentioned that we need a prophetic voice to confront the challenges of the maelstrom in the 21st century. What are some practical ways that we can make a difference in our churches and get back to being the image bearers that God intended us to be?
I think we are all learners, and we have more ground to gain. And, we are wrong about a lot of things. I mean, one of the biggest changes for me early on in those 10 years of singleness was coming to the realization that I was wrong about what I believed about God, that I thought it was kind of transactional. If I do all the do's and don't do any of the don'ts, there'll be payback for me. And I felt like he had abandoned me, and he never abandons us. And that just, I had to learn that. And then I had to learn that I was an Azer warrior, that I wasn't somebody that needed caring for, that I needed to take care of others. And I think that we need to come at the scriptures and at Jesus with this idea that there is more here, that we don't understand it all, and that we've gotten some things really wrong. And one of the things I think we need is to understand that the Bible is about him. It's his revelation of his character to us, that God is the main character of every story in the Bible, and that we need to understand patriarchy better than we do so that we can make sense of these stories and how radical they are. For a woman to set foot on the pages of scripture and be the bearer of fresh theology to us is revolutionary. Hagar was a theologian, and she was a slave, and she was a throwaway in the story. But she comes back and teaches us all that God sees us. We learn that from her. And I think it means more from her than if we learned it from Abraham. Because Abraham matters. He's important. She doesn't matter. And God sees her. So we need to put patriarchy behind the stories. It's the backdrop. And we need to understand that the Bible is a message of a whole story, that what God started in the beginning, Jesus came to restore. And that we are called to join Jesus in that mission, in that enterprise, in being the prophetic voice that says there's hope, there's a future that God is going to bring to pass, and we are the first wave of that. And we ought to be living as different human beings in radically different ways, not fitting into the patriarchal, paradigm of how men and women are defined, but with a dignity and meaning and purpose that we can give to others. We are bearers of great good news. And I just, I think it's explosive, and I think we've lost sight of that. And it just drives me crazy when pastors say, first, the bad news. The Bible doesn't say first the bad news. The Bible says, here's the good news. And that's what we are to proclaim. And, thank you for reading my book. Thank you for inviting me to be on your program. I think may God help us to embrace the call. It's to all of us.
Well, I can say you still have a lot of passion, definitely. So I think there's going to be a few more books coming out of you. So we'll have to wait and see. But what I wanted to do right now is get a chance to share myself. I'll go ahead and share first, and then Sherry will share. And then after that, we have a quick lightning round that we'll go through. And then after that, I'll wrap it up. So I just wanted to say for myself, I've immersed myself as much as I can in a bunch of literature recently, books, videos, conversations, and so forth. And I understand the outline, at least I can say, in a lot of respects, in terms of, the debate, men versus women, and a lot of the different things that have come down. But I think your book was very unique in the sense that it didn't necessarily have the same line of thought, but it brought it back to men and women are image bearers and not a theological debate as to something else. Yeah. I'm not saying those are not inaccurate arguments or points to take, but I think yours, to me, made the most sense. And I think definitely taking it back to Genesis 1 and 2 is, I think, the logical beginning, because obviously after that came Genesis 3, which is the fall, and a lot of mess, came from there. So I definitely appreciate the way you were able to help me to see the scriptures in new light. The other thing I do want to say is that going through your book, there are many books that are out there, and some are historical, and they have actually said they're historical, so there's no issue with that. But your book was a Bible study. So your book was a study through the scriptures. To you, if you were to make a point, you flushed it out thoroughly, and you had the stories that now I actually will be reading differently based on your study. And it actually also made me want to go back and read some of your other books that you've written, because this was just a side thought. This was kind of like you've written your main books and you were like, let me find out about men. And you wrote this as a leftover, men are, no, I'm just kidding. But you had your main books that you were writing. And so I'm thinking, wow, if this is, in a sense, a secondary, but, still a primary book, then it just made me want to go back and read some of the other books that you've written. So thank you for your book.
Oh, and Carolyn, I just want to say that, as I said before, I found it life-changing. Now, I read a lot. And Otoma knows this. And I read a lot about women in the Bible, and about gender, about race, about all of that. And this one was a Bible study. And I'm so grateful that you brought up Hagar. You are the God who sees me, because it made me cry, because it makes me cry every single time I read it in the Bible, and that she is a theologian. And I love that God used her this throwaway woman to teach us something so profound. And there's so much about your love for Jesus. And I was thinking about what one of my favorite fight against the patriarchy scriptures is in the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus says, don't look lustfully at a woman. Because I don't think that's about sex at all. I think it's about power. And that he's basically saying that woman is not yours to possess. She is her own person. She is an image bearer. You're not to assert your power over her sexually in any other way, that she is your equal. And that's what I found most impacting about your book. And I've read it twice now, and I'm going to read it a third time and take notes because I want to be able to use some of your amazing arguments. I guess they're not arguments. They're, you know what I'm saying. To be able to, first of all, disciple my own heart, because I think in these recent sort of woman's role battles, I think that I've gotten a little angrier and more frustrated at male leaders than is probably helpful to me. And this helped me to remember that I'm the Ezer Connecto. I'm not battling for women's, I'm not battling for egalitarianism. I am battling for image bearing. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now, are we doing our lightning round?
Yes.
Okay.
Carolyn, here comes the lightning.
Here's our lightning round. Okay. Number one, Carolyn, what is your favorite cuisine?
I like Japanese food.
Sushi?
Yeah. Some of
Cool. What is your favorite film or series?
I like Masterpiece Theater, just about everything they do. We're watching All Creatures Great and Small right now.
Very highbrow of you. Yeah. What is your morning routine?
Just a struggle to get out of bed. It's really funny because that's kind of think time for me, and I'll stay in bed a little bit longer just to get my brain going. Yeah. Cool. But then it's just into the office and starting to work.
Coffee?
My husband makes me coffee every morning.
Oh, bless him. That's a true Jesus. That's a true Jesus.
He does.
Do you prefer a paper Bible or a digital Bible?
A paper Bible. I read and write at the same time, underlining and circling, and I ruin books, I think, for giving them away.
What is your favorite book of the Bible right now? Because we know that it changes over time. But
yeah, I would say the Book of Ruth. It has been life-changing for me. But right now I'm reading through N.T. Wright's New Testament in its world. It's this thick, and I'm about halfway through, and he gave me a new love for Galatians and for 1 Corinthians, which was kind of surprising to me.
Yeah. Who is your favorite Bible character, I guess, of the moment or ultimately?
Yeah, besides Jesus would be Ruth. Absolutely Ruth.
Cool. Outside the Bible, what is your favorite book or author?
I rarely read fiction, but I do love the Jane Austen and Charlotte Bronte. We lived in England for 4 years, and I read them all there. It was so fun. So I would say them, but I love N.T. Wright. I love Walter Brueggemann and Miroslav Volf. And anyway, and Moltmann, I love him too. So those are, cool. Some of them are very hard to read, but they're rich.
Is there a book you think that everybody should read in the next 12 months besides yours?
No.
Well, it could be yours.
I would say Jesus and John Wayne is really good to read.
So good.
I also think, and it's just so timely and so honest,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really opening a lot of our eyes to things that we embraced and
Yep.
thought were so wonderful when we were kids or something. So I would say that, and her earlier one is really powerful. It's what drove her to write Jesus and John Wayne. So it's called The New Gospel for Women. And
Okay. Woo! Another book to put on my list.
You guys, it's like you start with the women's book, and then like an afterthought, you and Kristin, I'm going to have to speak to her. Like, I guess I'll write a book about men.
Yeah. Well, I'm still grieving her first book because it's just it's heartbreaking because this woman did all kinds of really important work and it was asking really important questions, and just her work, her pastor said it dropped like a rock in the ocean. And we forgot her. And so we're having to sort of start over with some things.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a big loss.
Whew. Okay. So what is your favorite place to live?
Well, that's hard to answer because I've loved everywhere that I've lived since my husband and I got married, and we've lived in a lot of different places. I said we lived in England for 4 years. He studied at Oxford University, and we love that. I love where we live now in Pennsylvania. It's where we were living when we first got married. And we've also lived in Southern California. I'm a West Coast girl. I grew up in Oregon. And
okay.
So it's just, Florida, we've lived there too. So
cool. Where do you most want to visit?
Where do I most want to visit? I have been blessed to go a lot of different places. I would be happy to go back to Europe again, to go back to England. And
cool. All right, here's your last one. You ready?
I don't know.
I don't know if you are. If you could place a billboard in the middle of your city, what would it say?
Oh, dear. And I don't know because I don't like billboards. I would love to put my books up on there, but I don't know. Probably Go Phils. You never asked me what my favorite sport is, and that's a whole new story.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, we didn't include that one. How very unmale of us, I guess.
Oh.
I know. I'm just messing. I'm messing with the whole concept here. I was being very meta. All right. Cool.
Well, thank you again so much for joining the program. I think that your book is a very, very powerful book. Hopefully those watching this will get a chance to pick up your book, and hopefully that will lead to other books that you've written. And, again, it's not necessarily just about reading. I think it's about transforming the way that we think and interact with each other. And prayerfully that'll change the dynamic in our churches. So I think it's not necessarily just one thing. I think it's multiple things that make a net, in a sense, a web, if you will, to our thinking as we start to connect the dots. So thank you for your book.
Thank you.
For those of you that enjoyed this episode, I am going to include in the show notes and also somewhere around here, there's going to be a link that you can click on for the interview that we did with Dr. Kristin Cobes-Dumais on her book, Jesus and John Wayne. So watch that after this one. I think you'll really get a lot out of that. I also want to just give a shout out to Nicoletta Koha, who is an awesome disciple. She supports the channel and just a great, great person. So wanted to just give her a shout out at this time. So hopefully we didn't, we kept to our promise and you're able to learn some things and have some fun at the same time. Have a great rest of the day.